Hey, it's Phil Wade with Dalton Wade Real Estate Group, and we're just about ready to get started with tonight's webinar, which is on the seller's property disclosure. Just want to check and make sure everybody can hear me, and I'm coming through clearly. So just type in and let me know if everyone's able to hear me. Hey, Sherry, sounds good. Hey, Patricia. Hey, Omar, how are you? Darren, Cindy, cool. All right, guys. Glad everyone's able to hear me. Hi, Sandra. Hey, Andre. Hey, Trish. Awesome. Glad everyone hear me. Let's maybe give it another minute and see if a few more people sign on before we kind of get going. But so tonight we're going to talk about the excuse me, the seller's property disclosure, and we're going to look at it from from a couple of ways. One as the listing agent and kind of what you want to do with that. And then also, hey, Larry, glad you're here. Looks like we got a couple more people popping on. Everybody can say hello. That's awesome. So tonight we're going to talk about the seller's property disclosure. We're going to talk about it from sort of two angles. One, as the listing agent, and then kind of what your responsibilities are there, and then as the buyer's agent. And then we're going to give you some examples of items that I've run across or my agents have run across that should have been disclosed that unfortunately weren't. And we're going to kind of talk about those and, kind of work through those. So, all right, so let's keep going. So the first thing we're going to talk about is on kind of the listing side. So the seller's property disclosure, it's not a required document, guys. It's optional, quite honestly. At Dalton Wade, we are believers in the seller's property disclosure, and here's why. One, it helps sellers identify, potential material defects that should be disclosed. Two, it kind of holds them accountable. If after the fact there is a problem, we'll talk about that in terms of how they might answer a question if it's not correct. Some brokerages don't like seller's property disclosure to be completed because it kind of puts that seller sort of on the hook almost, and they'd rather not have it. So again, the people that are here, like your brokerage, because I know not everybody here is an agent. Is that something that your broker requires or not? Just kind of chime in if you'd be so kind. If you know. Not required here. Does not. All right, so a couple not required. Regency where Trish works, it's required. So, so the actual form is optional. So as we see, most agencies do require it. So Elaine, it's required where she works. So, but we've got a couple of not required, few more required. La Rosa, it's required, right? So it's more require it than don't. So again, so sometimes you might be working and not be one because that firm won't provide it. So just be aware of that. But what is required is that all material defects in the property be disclosed to the buyer, and those and those are defects that the buyer potentially they're not readily observable. So if a roof is old, is that a material defect? Well, it is, but the buyer is going to be able to see that through visual observation. These are defects that the buyer just through looking may not sort of see, and then ultimately buy the problem and then feel, well, they should have disclosed that to me. So, and then the property disclosure form, which I'm sure everyone has seen, it helps the seller, disclose, what is potentially a defect. But if you're the listing agent, you need to be telling your client and asking your client, and explaining to them, what this is a law. The law is that all material defects be disclosed. So you want to communicate that to your client so that, hopefully, we'll give people the benefit of the doubt. You're dealing with, honest people, that want to do the right thing. Unfortunately, through my experience, I've run into sellers, unfortunately, that don't do the right thing, and agents that kind of are culpable in it as well. They're not doing the right thing. And we're going to kind of talk about those examples, and, kind of where that agent. So as a listing agent, again, if your brokerage requires it, you want to get that filled out. If your brokerage doesn't require it, if you're the listing agent, you still need to have that conversation, with your client, with that seller, that any material defect in that home, you may not know of them, right? But they certainly need to be disclosed. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. So, all right, so this. Let's talk about this. So if the seller does not live in the property or it's flipping the property, this does not excuse them from completing the disclosure, and certainly does not excuse them from disclosing material defects in the property. We'll see those, and I'm sure everyone has seen them. They've lined out the disclosure. They tell you they know nothing. That's I'm going to swear, that's crap. That's bullshit. They know it's their property. They own the property, right? If they have a tenant in that property, who does the tenant call if there's a problem? They call the seller. If there's a management company, right, and they call the management company, and there's a repair, something needs to be fixed or done, that seller has to pay for that. So when they tell you, they don't know anything about the property, does that make sense to anybody? No, of course they know, but the red light should go off. Your antenna needs to go up, and like, okay, who am I dealing with? Are these people, straight up shooters, or are they trying to pull something over me and my client? So, and then again, if you're the listing agent, you're kind of getting dragged in there as well. How about flip property? You never see seller. Yeah, right. I mean, again, because they don't do them, and they don't want to. It should make you nervous, right? It should make you, as the buyer's agent or even the listing agent. Again, they don't have to fill out the disclosure, but if there's a defect in that property, they need to disclose that. It's black and white. It's the law, right? So you need to disclose it, and you need to have that conversation. If your seller is not willing to fill out the disclosure, or your firm, doesn't require it, and you have to ask them, do you know defects in this property? Plain and simple, blunt, right? And again, why don't they want to fill it out? And again, we're going to talk about, some examples of where something should have been disclosed and it wasn't. So again, so that disclosure, it needs to be completed by, the seller, not the agent. Needs to be updated if new events come to light. What do I mean by that? So, as you're in that house, you're doing open houses, questions are being asked. You may find out things about that property that then need to be disclosed. Always err on the side of over disclosure, right? It's always better to over disclose, because again, that's really the job of an agent. You, as the listing agent, there are certain things you're responsible for. And again, like if the seller and you don't know, well then, yeah, sometimes, things do happen, or there are problems, with a property that nobody knows about. Hopefully the home inspector uncovers it, or the appraiser, and it kind of comes to light. But if they know, and it needs to be disclosed. And if you're ever like, okay, should I disclose this or not? Call your broker. Ask them. That's what they're there for. Their call at the end of the day. And you should be consulting them and having them guide you. And it's not something just to be, to be blown off. If you want to be skeptical in this job, how about, skepticism is a good thing, both as a buyer's agent and as a listing agent. You want to be skeptical. Unfortunately, we wish everybody was, 100% straight, but sometimes people get blinded, and they get blinded by money. And that's why they don't want to disclose the issue. They want to hide the issue because they know it affects the value of that house. They're trying to pull the wool over, that buyer's eyes. And you don't want to have that happen, as the listing agent. So you always, want to err on the side of, over disclosure. And if there's ever any question, you should immediately be on your, the phone to your, to your broker. I mean, as an agent, as a listing agent, that is the number one thing that can kind of get, where a problem can occur. Something should have been disclosed. You knew of it and it wasn't disclosed. So that's a problem. So you want to make sure, you want to be thinking like that. I mean, we earn nice commissions, right? There's, responsibility that goes along with that as well. So, all right, so let's move on to the next slide. And so now, now we're kind of talking about, I just want to say one last thing before we, before we kind of go on to, before we kind of go on to the buyer side. So, here's the thing, if, I know I have the wrong slide up, so I'm going to fix that. Ask this question, you're the listing agent. And, should it be disclosed or not? And you say, well, I'm not going to disclose that, or I don't think we have to disclose that. Here's the test. The test is if the buyer found out after they closed, would they be upset? Would they be unhappy? Would they feel that somehow, they bought something, they should have been told that? And if the answer is yeah, if I was the buyer's agent, I would want to do that, then it needs to be disclosed. That's kind of the test and sort of how you should be thinking. So again, just some guidance there. So, all right, so let's move on now. You're the buyer's agent. So we're going to talk about that side. So as part of the offer, hopefully, there's a seller's disclosure. It's linked into, it's linked into the MLS. Listing agent, seller's disclosure, they put that up there. And then you review it with your buyer. And if it's not there, you ask the agent, where is it, right? Again, you want that. Here's why. The first thing is you're going to be making an offer, right, based on your visual observation of that house, the comps. But then in the disclosure, there may be something that, is important to your buyer. And if they don't sign it and review it, they don't know of it. Hopefully it comes out in the home inspection. Well, now they think maybe the house is worth less and it can potentially have your deal fall apart. You did all that work, you got the contract under agreement, and then it fell apart at the home inspection. But if you had looked at that seller's disclosure, if there was one, and they had told you it was an issue, you could have factored that into your offer. So if there is no disclosure and you're, again, I always want my agents to get that disclosure. I just think on the buy side, it's very, very helpful. Ask the listing agent where it is. Why isn't it attached? We're submitting an offer and we want to sign the seller's disclosure with it. If it's not there, ask them if the seller will complete it. If they won't complete it and it isn't there, ask that listing agent. Maybe defects in that property that you need to be telling them. They tell you no, again, when there isn't a seller's disclosure, buyer's agent, it's like you need to be even more skeptical about what's going on with that property. Is there anything, that's maybe not right here, right? And hopefully, everybody's using an awesome home inspector, right, who does a very, very thorough job and who has your back, and is making sure that they're sort of doing, all the stuff that home inspector needs to do. I just got, an agent of mine sent over, seller, hadn't lived there. So the brokerage, and they'll remain anonymous, has a form that says, yeah, the seller does not occupy the property, therefore he knows nothing about it. Again, like that's just not right. If you have rental properties, you know what's going on, right? If you're flipping that property, you've been very, very intimate with everything that's gone on, right? You know what's happening. And to not tell people, again, should just, as that buyer's agent and even as the listing agent, it just should make you a little bit, a little bit nervous. Is this client, is that seller, is he being upfront with me? What kind of vibe am I getting from him? Right? Flippers are the worst because it's all about the money, right? And they take shortcuts and they unpermitted, all things that ultimately can, be a problem for you as the listing agent and as your buyer. So again, I'm not trying to scare anybody or be over dramatic here, but again, you want to be, diligent, skeptical. That's how you should be out there working. So, all right, so let's kind of move. I think the next slide talks about, okay, here are some examples of items where it kind of became known after the fact, and in my opinion, all of these things should have been disclosed by the listing agent and weren't. Looks like Elaine is typing something, so we'll let her kind of give us her thought there. All right, so we'll keep talking here. So the first one is what about the inherited house where they really don't know anything about it? Okay, if they really truly don't know anything about it and they've never lived there, then that is what it is, right? And then they're probably not able to complete the seller's disclosure, and then and that's fine, right? But again, if you're the buyer's agent, okay, that seller is not telling you anything about that house. And what that says to me as buyer's agent is I need to be extra skeptical and do more in terms of kind of making sure that my client is not buying a pig in a poke. Again, I mean, there's your effort, there's the title company, there's that home inspector, there's the appraiser, right? So there's a lot of checks to make sure everything is good. Sometimes, and again, as we kind of go through these examples, you'll see where, okay, maybe, the listing agent, in my opinion, like if they messed up, and again, if they intentionally messed up, then they should be fired. Okay, period. I would never want them working for me because they're a liability. Okay, so let's talk through these and you'll see what I mean. So basically the washer dryer hookup. So this is a deal I had. I was the buyer's agent. So it was a condo. It's in a huge condo development. And my client, she's not so into like the community washer dryer room, right? So she really wants the washer dryer in the unit. So lo and behold, we're in the second bedroom and we see the washer dryer hookup. Awesome. Perfect for her. So one of my agents had sold, some properties in there. So I emailed him to get the condo docs. And he says to me, there's going to be a management interview. And I said, yep, I'm aware of that. And he goes, well, the one question they're going to ask is there a washer dryer hookup? And I'm like, oh, really? Yeah. He goes, they're all illegal. Okay. So again, I call the listing agent and I'm like, dude, what is up with this? Oh, um, you notice I didn't mention it in the listing. Huh? What are you talking about? We're about to sell a very important feature to my client that basically is illegal by the condo association. No, no, because you didn't like mention it, that doesn't matter, right? There's a problem in that unit that should have been disclosed, plain and simple. Now, again, I don't know the dynamic that he went through, Maybe, I mean, who knows? Did he tell his client it needed to be disclosed? Hopefully he did. Obviously they didn't disclose it. Did he call his broker and ask what I should do? I have no idea. But again, it didn't pass the litmus. My client ended up backing out of it because of that. But if my other agent didn't tell me, we may never have found out. And she's going to be very unhappy if she gets a knock on her door from the condo association and they tell her they have to rip that thing out. So that's the point. Okay, the next one is rodent issue, right? So in this case, the listing agent is actually helping the seller in kind of managing some repairs, and they had put a new AC. Now in this one, there was a seller's disclosure, and then it asks, right? There's a question, point blank, have there been any pest issues? Seller answers no. Now up above where the air handler is, there's all rat traps. Come to find out, because the buyer, after she bought it, a new air handler. And when they open, the ceiling up, to do that, out come the rat traps, out come the rodent excrement. Again, that seller, I mean, it would appear to me they blatantly lied, because they had to know, because they put the traps up there. And the agent knew, right? And he knew as well. And then when we started to press on him, like, he shut down all the communication with him. Again, terrible, just terrible. He's a broker, actually. So that was a bad one. All right, the next one, screen lanai. Here, okay, so it's a townhouse, and off the living room is like a 180-foot screened-in porch lanai. So the door from the living room goes to the lanai. The light switch inside the house turns on the light on the lanai. There's a tenant in there. All his personal possessions, bill, his bike. Okay, so when the survey comes back, it's found out that, the lanai is on somebody else's property, and the buyer's now very unhappy because, again, you would assume, right? A reasonable person assumes that lanai, the door goes from the house to the lanai. The light switch turns on the lanai, right? The light on the lanai. Now, again, when we went back and we looked at the in the remarks, there's no mention of the lanai. In the photos, listing agent didn't take any pictures of the lanai. There was no seller's disclosure. We asked them to complete it, which they did after, and then there was a couple of questions. There's a question on, are there any easements or encroachments, which would kind of fall into this. And all the other questions, the seller answers yes or no. On those two questions, he answers don't know. Now, when he bought the property, come to find out afterwards, same survey company did it. He knew that that porch was not part of the property. Now, again, because the listing agent, right, didn't, take any pictures of it or didn't mention it in the remarks, doesn't let him off the hook. He knew that that lanai didn't belong to that property. That's something that should have been disclosed and wasn't. He's covering it up. That's how you get in trouble as a listing agent. All right, the next one is drainage. Again, another situation where on the seller's disclosure, there's a question that asks, are there any drainage issues? The seller says, no, there aren't. So they sell the house during December, which is like the driest month in Florida. And then all of a sudden, when the rainy season comes, everybody's water from all the adjoining yards drains into this particular property. And then they go out and they see a pump, but the pump's broken, right? So again, the seller lied. Now, in that case, we're not really sure whether or not, the listing knew, because maybe it never rained when she was there, who knows? But that seller knew, and they chose to answer the question. got sued and basically lost, So again, honesty, I mean, is always best. And then the last one is permits. This is a big one. A lot of work here in Florida gets done without permits, right? So you want to be careful, oh, it's a garage conversion. It's been turned into a 3 bedroom. Now it has no garage, but they didn't pull a permit. Again, your buyer is buying that property as is, and again, on the seller's disclosure, there's a question, have all the, correct permits been pulled? They answer yes, great. If the answer don't know, well, then you have to ask them, what does that mean? Don't know. So again, kind of that skepticism, needs to be there, as the buyer's agent. So just again, I mean, again, it's as the listing agent, disclose. It's safest course. It's the best course. It causes less problems, right? I mean, that's kind of what, it's one of the reasons, and it's not talked about so much, but as when a house is sold by a realtor as opposed to like a for sale by owner, there's a certain confidence, that buyer should have, because a realtor has sold that property. There's extra care and diligence. Where when it's for sale by owner, like who knows if that for sale by owner knows any of these things, whether what has to be disclosed, right? So, you want to make sure that you're doing a good job, around that. So, just, again, just kind of, so again, we'll kind of wrap it up here. So you want to, err on the side of over disclosure, as the listing agent, ask yourself if the buyer found out, you know, about that issue subsequently, are they unhappy? Right. And then if they're going to be, then you should have disclosed it or you would want to disclose it. Seller does not want to disclose something that you think should be disclosed. You've got to ask your broker what to do. And then as a buyer's agent, if there's no disclosures, no written, seller's disclosure, okay, that's fine because it's not required, but why aren't they providing it? What's really going on here? So, all right, let's throw it out for some questions, see what everybody thinks. Maybe some people have run into some situations, and now's the time maybe to ask. Issues are found not originally disclosed, mold behind kitchen cabinet. Is the seller, required to promptly up? Yeah, they are, most definitely. That's the whole thing about, when you do a property goes under contract, and then there's the home inspection, stuff comes out that now needs to be disclosed if that buyer walks away to the next buyer. Something like that, unless it's fixed, even if it's fixed, it would need to be disclosed. Previously there was mold behind the kitchen cabinet. It's been rectified. Here's the receipt. And then you're good. But yeah, that stuff all needs to be disclosed subsequently. Again, as you're like in that house, I had one where, I was doing an open house. It's like $1 million property, and the owners come back, and she says to me, "Oh, did anybody notice how the tree roots are like lifting up the floor in the living room over in a corner?" I'm like, "No, but now that you told me, I think we need to, more than likely it would come out, but the home inspector might miss it, and then they bought the house and could become a I had a VA buyer and they really liked the property, but we found out one of the rooms was illegal addition without permits." Yeah, I mean, it's like it doesn't even exist. It's if it's not permitted, it's not even there. And what happens is that appraiser, will not count that as being there. They will value that house based without it. And so again, if that seller in that case had filled out, a question, um, and it said, have all permits been pulled? If they answered incorrectly, then, Again, it just says that that seller's, not kind of a straight shooter. Is a seller required to disclose future changes in the community, significant commercial development that could impact future value? Um, I mean, again, like if they've been notified through like the owners association or through the condo association, that this is coming, yeah, I mean, they would need to tell, they would need to tell the buyer that this is happening. Most definitely. Again, it kind of goes on that side of like, disclose, disclose, disclose. Because again, think of it from the buyer's point of view. Like that seller knew that, but they chose not to tell the buyer. And then eventually the buyer bought the house. And why wouldn't they tell them? Because now maybe they feel, oh, my house is going to be worthless. That's why people don't disclose things, because they're trying to hide it. And that's where the problem occurs. Looks like Darren has a follow-up question. Serious crime like a murder in the property. I don't. I have to double check on that. I know if there's a death, that doesn't have to be disclosed in Florida. Those are more things that again, probably would want to disclose it, but it probably isn't affecting the value all that much. I mean, obviously, it's in a bad neighborhood, so I'd have to double check on that one. Hey, Tamsin. Yeah, they're all recorded. So basically, as long as you've signed up previously, you can go back. You could access it through the email they send you, and then you're able to sort of, look at past. You obviously can't ask questions, but you can see sort of the questions, and you can see the replay. All right, Craig. I had appraiser include square footage that wasn't included in public record. These days, it seems like everything is dependent on the appraiser you get. They all don't seem to work from the same set of guidelines. That's a good one. Again, my experience there, that they go off of the public record. The public record, that's what I seem to see happen the vast majority of times, that they use the public record, and that's kind of what they base it on. Again, if somebody's, got they've added like a porch, you want to maybe check the public record and kind of see what's there. But again, as the listing agent, and again, it's all about disclosure, right? So, the public record says, let's just say 1,500 square feet, but, the house is actually, 1,650, right? Because, they included, a room that's now finished space. As long as you tell people, right, you can market it as 1,600 square feet. As long as you disclose it, that there's a difference between, what's on the MLS, and what's on the county record. All right, Ed has a question. Is there any wording to add to the MLS realtor to cover yourself for any seller undisclosed items? Anything wrong with seller discloses all known items and realtor has no additional knowledge of any further items or something similar? Yeah, I mean you can do that. It's again, you don't. Here's the thing. I mean, if you truly don't know, then you don't know. But it's when you like the examples I gave. Well, the drainage one we never really knew whether the agent knew. But the other examples, the washer dryer hookup, that agent knew. He chose not to disclose it. The rat issue, that agent knew. He knew, and they answered the question incorrectly, and he knew, and he let him do it. That's a problem, right? The other one was the lanai, right? The porch, the extra square footage. A reasonable person, the door from the house goes out there. It's attached to the house. There's a light switch in the house. Assume that's part of the property. He knew it wasn't, and he didn't disclose it. That's where you get in, and that's where the issues, kind of come up. I mean, there was another case. I don't know if anybody heard of this up in Spring Hill, right? Like the sinkhole capital of the world. Okay, what happened there? There was a sinkhole, and there was $150,000 check cut to the sellers, the homeowners, to repair the sinkhole. Well, they pocketed the money. They never fixed it. And then they sold the property, right, to an unsuspecting buyer. And both agents, the listing agent and the buyer's agent, and again, I don't know all the details, you know, what they did, but they both got arrested, right? And the homeowner got arrested, the seller got arrested because, again, that's a material defect. You know, that listing agent, should have asked, right? They said, they disclosed there was a sinkhole, but what they didn't disclose was they kept the money that was supposed to have been used to repair it. The realtor should have said, where's the documentation where you repaired this? So, again, just, I mean, it's black and white. I mean, so as the broker, like, I get the calls. They're never like, oh, we had a great closing. I don't get those calls. I get, oh, there's a problem call. And these have been some problems. We've worked through them all. But again, it's where that listing, they knew, and they would have asked themselves, if I don't disclose this, is that buyer going to be upset if they purchase that house and find out later? It's simple, right? So that's what the listing agent, I mean, that's what you got to be doing. And again, is your client, do they seem like a straight shooter? Do they seem honest? Oh no, they're a flipper. Flippers are motivated by money. They don't. I mean, because again, once that property is sold, it's hard. How do we see the answers to the question that the other agents are asking? I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, Kathy. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? The questions listed above, you're not able to see those in your feed. It may be because you signed on a little bit later. Oh, well, the answers are just, given verbally. I mean, I'm trying to answer the questions that come through. So I don't type them in. So if you haven't heard them, then, they were already given. Yeah, exactly. So that's right, Trish. So, all right. So, any feedback, any comments, wrap it up. Hopefully everybody, got something out of this, you know, becoming a little bit better agent out there, a little more skeptical. All good advice. Thank you, Ed. If the seller's agent responsible to inform the seller about the discovered issues, is it common or not to sell the inspection reports or to the seller? The buyer spent, I mean, that's the deal. You can do that. I mean, usually, thank you, Larry. Usually, as part of the negotiation of the home inspection, that seller is going to want to see that report. So it's perfectly fine, to send them, I mean, usually what I do is, I summarize, kind of what's there, and then I'll tell them like, oh, there's all this stuff we could have asked for, but here's, the 3 or 4 things we're looking for. Thank you, Trish. Great. They enjoyed it. Andre, I appreciate you tuning in. All right, Sandra, sounds good. Trisha, thank you so much. Awesome. All right, guys, I'll hang in there another couple minutes to see if anybody has any last questions, but it looks like everybody's gotten a lot out of it. Awesome. Kenny, thank you so much. I'm glad you were able to tune in. All right, guys, I'll hang for another minute. see if anybody has any last questions, but I do think we're wrapping up. AJ, how are you? Good night, Jenny. Thank you so much. All right, guys. Good job. I appreciate you all tuning in. Shows you want to be good realtors. That's awesome. Thanks so much. Thank you, Sherry. Good night.